Hello, I'm Joel.
And I'm Alex.
Welcome
to the Commander's Journey.
the place where we discuss our favorite format of Magic, Commander, from the perspective of a new player.
And an experienced one.
This journey is for new Magic players who are interested in Commander. So today, Alex, should I mulligan?
Yes.
Wait.
That's the answer. Just yes.
Yes? Okay. But wait, what if I have two lands and four cards that are like 5 CMC or higher? Should I mulligan?
Yes.
Okay, what if I have like 5 lands and 2 cards that are 1 CMC?
The answer is no, but honestly, yes. To make this bit work. So, just so quickly, everyone knows the mulligans rules have changed a lot recently. We started with, early days. They messed with the Paris mulligan, and then they moved on to the Vancouver mulligan. Now we're on the London mulligan now, and
I'm waiting for us to get to the California mulligan.
we're working our way there. We'll eventually
it'd have to
we'll
be
hit
a city
all
though, right?
Yeah.
San Francisco, the
There
San
you go.
Francisco mulligan.
So rule 103.4 with the new mulligan rule is to take a mulligan, a player shuffles the cards in their hand back into their library, draws a new hand of cards equal to their hand size, then put the number of those cards equal to the number of times that player has taken a mulligan on the bottom of their library in any order. Now with Commander, it's pretty much the same way, except that you get your first mulligan is free.
So what you're saying is you draw 7 cards, and if you like them, you keep them. But if you don't, with an EDH, you get a free mulligan. So you can just shuffle them back into your deck, draw 7 more. But again, if you don't like them, you have to shuffle them back in your deck, draw 7 more, but then you have to put one of them on the bottom of your library. And if you keep doing that, you'd have to put 2 and then 3. But each time you get to draw 7, right?
Exactly. And just the number of times you mulligan, you got to put that number back in there again, with the first one being free.
Perfect.
So we're going to talk more about like why you mulligan, when to mulligan, and specifically in Commander. So, I mean, when I played Standard, when I first started playing Arena, you play online, you get a hand given to you randomly, and there's one land in it. Of course, you can't play like that. So I hit a mulligan. Next hand, I'm going to get 6, or I'm going to get 7. Choose one. It goes away. But in Commander, what would be a hand that you would typically keep?
So, and this is for me personally, a lot of people have their own different nuances or deck specific things they care about. And for the most part, I don't quite get there, though. There are times when they do have one deck I think a little bit extra about it. But usually for me, I'll keep a 3-lander. If I have 2 or less, I won't keep it. If I have 6 or more, I still will generally keep it unless I draw all lands, which I think I didn't shuffle well enough at that point. I will generally mulligan away at that for, again, 7 lands or 2 or 1. If I have 3, 4, 5, 6, I will keep them.
So you basically, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 lands,
yes, even 6.
You'll keep 7.
7, I will mulligan. At that point, I think I didn't shuffle well enough, and I need really the shuffle than the mull.
What if you had 6 and then you had a card, but it was like the CMC on it was like 7?
I've kept that, and I've been okay with it because we have the Commander access to it. That's an additional creature and or planeswalker
That's a good thought.
you do not have in your hand. So really, you have a hand of 8 guaranteed with a creature.
There you go. Now, how about if you have, because this happened to me, you draw, so you're thinking, if I have at least 3 lands, at least for me, when I first started, like very simple, it was like, I need to have at least 3 lands. And I'd have 3 lands, and in my hand, I wouldn't mulligan.
Yeah.
But I had 2 lands, and I had another land that I guess really isn't considered a land at the beginning of a game, Temple of the False Gods.
Yes.
But I thought it was a land, and
It is technically a land, but Temple of the False Gods does not count. I would not it's a ramp card. It's not a land. So unless I already have another 4 lands and also a 5th land that is Temple of the False Gods, I would not count it as a land count in your opening hand. Ignore it. Treat it like it's a ramp spell that just happens to cost you, or 5 really, that you can play on the 5th turn to get that additional ramp that you would not otherwise have. And just so everyone knows, Temple of the False Gods is a land. That's simply tap it, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool.
If you have how many lands out?
If you have 5 lands out.
Yeah. So you can't just, it's not like Soul Ring.
Yeah.
It doesn't just act on its own. You have to have other lands in play for it to really be. So that's why we say, especially at the beginning of the game, it's a ramp card.
Exactly. And
Counting
it can be your 5th land, and then tap for it immediately. As long as you have 5 lands out, it is also a land. You can use it. And that's the big requirement. But
so what if I had 1 land and a Soul Ring?
I would not keep that hand. While I do think if you can cast the Mono Rock from your hand instantaneously, you might think about it a little more. Like, let's say you have 2 lands and a Signet. I would be really on the fence, and I might end up keeping that. But honestly, I think you probably shouldn't, unless you have 3 lands, and then that's just additional ramp. But for some decks, like especially if you have something like a Rampant Growth, which is for 1 in a green, search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. That one, you could, maybe I would keep a hand with that, where I'd have 2 lands, one of them being a green, and then the Rampant Growth. I might keep that hand because I know I'll get to 3 on turn 3.
What if, okay. But what if it's like a monocolor deck? Say you're playing a mono black and you have 1 swamp and 1 Soul Ring.
I would not keep that hand.
Nope.
I would 2 in a Soul Ring. I wouldn't even keep the hand. I would keep it with 3 in a Soul Ring. But again, I'd be more on the fence about the 2 in the Soul Ring.
I think I might.
You might keep that one.
Well, because I think typically for me, at least, I mean, especially like my black deck or my black and white deck, like I'll have a lot of low CMC creatures as well in there, because I also know it's harder to ramp in that. So I guess for me, more theoretically, when I build decks, if it's hard, if I don't have green, if it's hard to ramp in those for that commander, I'll typically have a good number of low CMC spells so that I can play things earlier, and it's kind of, I guess, a way of cheating my ramp.
There's a nuance to it. There's no clean cut answer, and it varies depending on what's going on in the deck you're playing, maybe the decks around you, or personal opinion. I think again, you could be right. It depends on what you draw into next.
Because I know if I have enough lands in there and I have, say, a swamp, a Soul Ring, and I have like 2 creatures that are like 1 swamp, and I have another creature that's a swamp and 2 generic, and I have enough of those creatures in my starting hand, I might risk it and go play like that too.
And it's one of those things, just because you don't know what you're going to draw, you could be completely correct, or you could just never get any land from that point for a little bit of the future and be burned. And there's a nuance to it. And really what I was going to say is, know your deck well, because what you can keep a little bit better the more familiar you are with the deck. I know I have a Geshath deck that we've talked about previously, which is a heavy ramp deck into very large dinosaurs. Yeah. I actually want to keep a hand. I will keep a 3 mana hand pretty much no matter what, so we can all play. But what I ideally want, and if I was for some reason, a more competitive environment than our casual games, I'd probably want a ramp spell in there as well. And I have so many, it's not too far off I'd have it.
So transitioning from like talking about casual play or more competitive play, you got to know the meta of your play group, or like if you're playing among friends or among strangers. Because I think that was one thing I was even experiencing the other night at the game store Commander Night, is like, you're around some people and you can kind of just feel the table out. People always wanting to cut your deck and making sure, like I know in our play group, we kind of have a few free mulligans. It's like
we house rule it. We let a few happen, and then there's a point where like, did you put enough lands in the deck, kind of thing?
Because we want everybody to play. It's very casual. But I guess if you're playing with some people a little more competitive, you're going to get that free mulligan because of the rules, but you're going to start mulliganing down. So know who you're around, and know kind of the meta, know the kind of the people you're playing with, so that you don't offend people, because and that is another reason to make sure you have a minimum of 37 lands. Go back to our blueprints episode, and we talk about kind of the breakdown of the numbers of lands and creatures and spells and removal and things you want in your deck and ramp. And you should have you should have something close to that so that you can make sure you're playing a good hand, no matter if you're in your environment with just your friends or you're playing with new people.
Exactly. And whatever, the house rule is, seriously, just ask your opponent, say, do you mind my, group, or I enjoy it when I can, take a couple extra free mulligans if I'm not getting enough lands. Is that okay with everyone? And if everyone says yes, go for it. If one person says no and just only one, I would respect that and say, okay, you go by what the official rule says, but just suss it out, get an idea of what's going on there. But the one thing I really wanted to talk about too with that is when you get into a situation where you have what you think is a good opening hand, and then just sometimes you don't draw any lands that need your deck to go. I've kept a 3-lander that I never drew a 4th land, and I was getting mana screwed for the first, I think, 6-7 turns of the game. And and the one thing I do want to point out is when that happens, when you run into mana screw, I honestly play it to your advantage. Try to see, hey, other people at the table can see you're having a hard time when you get a little mana screwed, and especially in a more casual group, they won't necessarily go for you immediately because of that. Though you'll know your play group if you have a guy in that table, maybe an infect player or something that sees you're a little weak and tries to weaken you some more. That'll happen too. Expect that.
Yeah, well, that's some bad play right there. That kind of breaks the social agreement there a little bit. Somebody's totally mana screwed and you're picking on them.
Exactly. And I've seen groups that are for some reason totally okay with that. Our group isn't, but they do exist.
Maybe in a more competitive environment, because you're going to have another game and a chance to play. And and that's another reason just to know who you're playing with. And again, if you don't, just respect the way people play. I mean, some people play more aggressively than they want to, and that's great, and play with them and enjoy that experience. And if honestly it's something you don't quite enjoy, maybe you enjoy playing with another person or two, but that's why it's good, I think, to get out and try and find people to play with, and it makes it fun. It makes it more enjoyable. You kind of get different flavors of what Commander is, instead of just playing with the same group all the time, where you kind of can get stuck in a rut.
Exactly. And really keep in mind what your lands can do. So when I say keep a 3-lander, I mean 3 lands that can make mana, can actually do something. Temple of the False God is a good example of one that can't unless you have 5, but there's a couple others
there's this one right here, Maze of Ith. It's a land, and it says tap, and you can untap a target attacking creature, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. This is an awesome protection spell, but I would not count it as a land, right? So if you have your 37 lands, and then you also have Maze of Ith and Temple of the False Gods, they would be extra cards. I wouldn't count them in my 37 minimum. Yeah. But Maze of Ith is an incredible card. It's helped out in so many situations. And I've seen in our play group where it's been used politically, where one person is helping another person by tapping out a creature, tapping out something, tapping out another attacking creature, just to make a deal and say, hey, if I tap that for you so he doesn't kill you, will you do this for me? So Maze of Ith is a great card, but it does not count against as your land. So know what your lands are, what they do, and know basically. And I think when you're thinking about mulliganing, you're thinking about, I would say, like in chess, you want to think as far ahead as you can, but like you can't exactly know in Magic what you're going to get next. So when you look at just your hand, just the 7 cards in your hand, you got to know, hey, the first 3 turns, what am I able to do? At least that's what I think. Like, can I do something on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3? At least get to there in your mind. And if you have, 2 lands, but you got a bunch of high CMC things, you're like, that's not necessarily a safe way. You're not going to necessarily get to play until maybe turn 5, so you don't want to do that to yourself.
It's a dangerous game, but again, don't forget you also have your commander as well, and you keep your commander in mind in terms of your curve is extremely helpful. So if you have low CMC commander, you can keep a lot more hands than if you have a high CMC one where you might get a little more picky.
Well, a great example, I just built a Corvold deck, and I noticed because he's a 5 CMC commander, I had to ramp, and I had a few bigger things that I had to ramp up even more. Um, so yeah, and then now I'm going to build an Ayara deck, and she's only a 3 CMC commander, so I don't have to think too heavily. It is mono black, but I don't have to think so much on how much ramp I need in that deck.
You don't have to think about your opening colors, though. That's for sure.
Oh no. That's another thing.
Yeah.
So if you have, say, a 4-color commander or 5-color commander, and you have opening hand, and you have 3 forests or something like that, what do you do then?
I will keep that hand as long as I have some green things to play. Now, let's say I have 3 forests and nothing but white spells. I don't think I'm going to keep that hand, actually. I think I will mulligan that one away, try to get something. Now, if I just had 1, white and then 2 green, and then I have a bunch of white spells, I'll keep that one because I can do something. But if I literally drew all of one color and all the fixing for another, I don't know if I would keep that one, unless I had so much mana that I really didn't, it balanced out a little bit.
So I think when you're thinking about whether you should mulligan or not, start with having enough lands and looking at the CMC of the things you have in your hand. But the next step, I think that next level of maturity and thinking of whether you should mulligan is looking at the colors too. I think we didn't talk a lot about it in deck building, but also once you have your entire deck list together, you want to go and count how many of those different color symbols are on all your spells, and then look at that percentage. We have it on our spreadsheet. So if you put in the CMC there, it'll show you the percentage of the different colors of lands you need as well, because you want to make sure you're fixing the colors so that you can play.
And you can see what way it leans one or the other. Yeah, those symbols, they get referred to as pips in Magic lingo. And it just is literally the number of the color symbol. Like, if it's just, 1 in a white, it's a white pip. Or if it's, 1 white, then you got 2 pips there for white. So,
yeah. And so if you have, say, something simple like a 2 color commander, and 80% of your pips are black and 20% are white, you want 80% of your lands to be tapping for black and 20% white. That's kind of a general rule, but it's something to think about.
Exactly. And think about with your opening hand too.
For sure. So there's so much we could talk about when it comes to mulliganing, but we just want to do a quick episode just to talk to new players about when you should, when you shouldn't, whether it's 2 lands, 3 lands. It's really kind of everybody's, preference. But we suggest having at least 3 lands in your opening hand and looking at the other cards in your hand, knowing if you can play.
Exactly. And, again, there's a nuance to it. There's a gray area of whether you should or should not keep it. And you'll kind of see what you generally go to and how much that pays off or not based on your deck. So just keep that in mind. And once you play enough times, you'll kind of see where you end up.
All right. Well, that'll do it for today. Everybody take care, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.